is. All right, it is 3:30. We're AD list, but we're going to get started anyway because we have a packed agenda. And welcome to Dublin. That's awesome. It actually cut it off in the here's the note well. You should be hopefully familiar with it. I know we have some single day participants, so I will give you all a moment to read the somewhat truncated slide. Sorry about that. If you have any questions, please go reference that, ask about it. This is the code of conduct you agree to that you participate under. Sorry. There's the note really well. This is behavior. You also agree to participate this way. If you're not aware of this, please be aware of this. If you feel that you have any issues, there are recourses. You can talk to your working group chairs. If you're not comfortable with that, there's the area directors. And if that doesn't work, you can talk to the ombuds team. Dave, can you mute?
I guess I can, yeah.
Yeah. Meet Echo's asking if you can mute if you look at the chat. Well, and here's the tips. Keep audio and video off if not using the on-site tools. I'm going to go by this one pretty quick. All right, document status. Interim meetings. This chair will apologize for screwing up the previous set of interim meetings. I apparently canceled the entire series of meetings when I intended to cancel only the first interim meeting. Sorry about that. The first interim meeting following this Dublin in-person meeting is already scheduled for 20 November. There is another set of them submitted to the IETF website. They should be happening every other week. They are on Wednesdays. I can tell you what time it is. Eastern time in the US, it's 3 p.m. If that's an awful time for you, you should complain to your chairs. They may consider changing it. At least one audience member is laughing. And since there's only two, I'll let you figure out which one that is. So there is ability to change that. It is notionally based on a doodle poll that I did a long time ago. So I'm open to feedback on that. And they will be happening, every other week at the same time as of now. But again, we can reschedule.
Hey, Chris, we're using your Zoom for that?
Yes.
And can you, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'm really asking an important question. Can you do the recording and AI summary stuff, or is that you have a
Yes,
limitation?
I can.
Okay, great. The AI summary stuff will help me get minutes out, actually. They can be fixed. They're not correct, but they can be fixed, and it will, because that was the request from people where the time zone simply will never work. So they just want to see the minutes. Okay.
Yep, will do.
Thank you.
Working group document status. So as you can see here, these are the active documents. As you can see, the majority of what's in our adopted queue is in some way aimed at publication at this point. We will be closing out working group last call on internationalization soonest. Even if you don't have any comments to make, can folks please send something to the mailing list that says they have read it? If you've done that, I appreciate it already. But if you have not, and you have at least taken a more than cursory look at it, please post something to the list. It really helps in shepherding right up to say that, yes, you do have reasonable evidence that there are sufficient reviews. Okay, we also have a pretty significant list of not yet adopted documents. I'm not going to cover them all here. This is more just so that you can kind of see what's in there. If there are some more still active non-expired documents that are personal drafts in NFSV4, but if they were older than August, and I know some of them are intended to just be let expired. In any case, I didn't get them. They're all on the data tracker, so surf there on your own dime. Okay, other stuff that's happening. So we did get, and it's on the list as well. It's on the slides here. An update from Chuck about some other activity related here. I've put those on the slide, but then also there was a recent Bakeathon. I'm open to a very brief update on the Bakeathon if anyone would like to give a summary of anything meaningful for the working group on that. And Tom's coming.
So the one thing I'll say it's not covered here is there was a lot of coverage.
You're gonna have to get closer to it.
Oh, there was a lot of coverage on Dell State ID, both client and servers.
Great, thank you. All right, and with that, I think I am done with.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
I sent a Bakeathon summary, very brief, to that wood area thing that seems to have been absorbed into the black hole of the mail lists. And
yeah, I haven't actually.
I'll send it out to the NFS working group.
Sounds great.
I got an update from Dixon.
Cool, thank you. All right, so my rushed approach to this is because this just barely fits in the time allotment we have. Rick, I see you in queue, and I'll let you go in just half a second. This lets us just barely finish on time, and so that's my rushed approach. Sorry, Rick, if hopefully Bakeathon or something else.
Oh, yes. All I was going to say is a lot of the work in the Bakeathon had to do with a synchronous copy and dealing with state IDs for that. But the various testers seem to be working on it, and other things seem to go pretty smoothly. The Delsted stuff seemed to go smoothly.
Excellent.
And that's all I have to say.
Appreciate it. All right, with that, so internationalization, we're in working group last call. Dave, I could go to your slide deck, but it's a big, long slide deck. Is there a brief update you can give about internationalization without me pulling that up first?
Okay.
If there's anything to add other than it's in working group last call.
Well, yeah, just let me know where it is. I think it started a while ago. It should be submitted now, I guess.
So there's not, as I kind of stated a moment ago, I need some folks on the list to say it's good to go. That's in the requirements
one of those.
for me to shepherd it out of the working group. So I'm looking for that. That's the only thing holding it up right now from kind of completing working group last call is just a couple more comments on the list to say, yes, it's got review. Christoph?
Yeah, so let me chime in.
Get a lot closer.
Okay, first, apologizing for everyone. I'm very, very behind on the mailing list, but I took the whole day to review as much as I can the documents we're talking about so far. And for the internationalization document, I'm very happy because they've basically put in everything I requested last time around, except for one thing, which isn't really specific to that document, but a more general thing for a bunch of the other updates we have. And that is, I don't think it's very useful if we're trying to update 4.1 and 4.2 in these 4.1 and 4.0 in these documents, given how obsolete and removed from current implementations 4.0 is. This is not specifically here. This shows up in a bunch of other things. And my impression is it's not helpful for the implementers and readers, but that might just be my personal opinion. I think we need to get a working group consensus on it.
Dave, any thoughts, comments on the 4.0 versus
Well, I thought we discussed this last time, and I think Brian summarized it, that we were told to do this. We want to do this. We've been doing this, and we should continue to do this. That is, we needed to treat internationalization and security as V4 NFSV4 overall things, because they're the same in all minor versions. So that's my position, and I don't know how, we don't need to get into a big argument on it, but that is my understanding, that's what we're doing. That's why I did, because the working group asked that it be done that way.
I have something. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead.
So no, I hear you, Dave. I was rereading the docs the past couple of days, and to Helwig's comment, right? What I want to take to an interim meeting for a little deeper discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What was the 4.0 question? I'm not quite sure. I understand the supporting all the documents when 4.1 says it completely obsoletes 4.0. I just never.
No, it doesn't say that.
Yes,
It says the
does.
opposite.
What do you mean it says the opposite? What says the
It
opposite?
says it's a separate protocol. It does not. It is a separate protocol. That's what it says.
Okay.
I can send you the quotations sometime today, but basically it says it does not V4.0 is not obsolete by V4.1. It says it does not do that. I don't think whether that's the right choice or the wrong choice, but that was the choice that was made.
Yeah, so that's definitely what the document says. But my impression of the IETF statement of you have to support your older documents is basically that we need to do errata processing, not that we need to do documents that update it. But maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
Okay.
All right. So let's run a little show of hands. And since we only have 13 participants, this should be reasonably quick. If this question isn't clear, please tell me. But for the internationalization document only, I'm only considering internationalization for this question. Are you okay with including 4.0 as well?
I have my hand down. Sorry. A new show of hands. Click here to show it.
All right. Is everybody? I'm probably going to close it off. Although I'll note that I have about 50% participation out of the, 15 of us. So if anybody else wants to comment now.
I can do that. I just don't want to set a precedent.
Fair enough. Anyone else who's a no care to comment on that? Christoph was opposed in the first place, and I respect that. That's okay. All right, I'm going to take that to the list, and we'll try and figure that out as we try and close out the working group last call on the document. I don't know that I have more there on that topic. Dave, any more comments as we move forward? Sorry, I got disconnected from Meet Echo, which is why you'll see the slides dance. Okay, let's move on to Flex File. I'll bring your slides up in just a second.
Well, I'll just hunch over.
This is you, right?
Yeah,
All right.
this one's me. Am I coming through? Okay. So we're doing client-side erasure encoding. We want integrity. We want it to scale. I'm going to read off this one, not the next ones. We want capacity performance, and we want performance with parallels writes. And if we do it with a server side, it's going to be a bottleneck on the server. So we're just going to spread the writes out. Next slide, please. This talk is about the infrastructure. I'm more concerned about how we implement it than we necessarily what is erasure encoding. So in this proposal, the proposal is to read and write in blocks, not bytes. We stage the writes for consistency with pending and activated, and reads only return activated blocks. So if we progress the next slide, or ought to give me a better picture for this. So we have the client has produced 4 data blocks. It's going to write those. So it produces a header. I'll define the header a little bit later. And it stripes the blocks across the DSs. And these blocks are not the data blocks. They are having gone through the erasure encoding algorithm, and they're outputted to the DSs. Pretty simple architecture. Thank you. And so the header information is basically a timestamp on the client and the client ID from the MDS that allows us to define who wrote the block onto the data server, and so that we can detect inconsistencies by examining if block 1 is written by client ID 1 and block 2 is written by client ID 3, and it's supposed to be written by client ID 1, we'll be able to detect something's going on. And we have a CRC32 that's independent of the erasure encoding algorithm, and it's simply to ensure integrity of the header and the data as it goes across the wire and down onto the disk. So we want to make sure that the header and the data are in sync. Next slide, please. And the decoding is just the reverse of that. We take the incoming blocks and convert them to data blocks. Yeah, pretty simple slide. Next, please. So the 2 terms that we define in here are integrity and consistency. Payload is consistent if all the contained blocks have the same client ID and change ID. Notice that the change ID is not sufficient because 2 clients could have the same change ID, so you need to differentiate. A payload has integrity if all of the blocks are consistent and they all pass the CRC32 checks. Again, this does nothing about the erasure encoding type. I don't care about the algorithm right now. I just care about the infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we've defined operations, for new operations for NFS 4.2. Activate, read, write, rollback, and read the block status, so we can check the status of the blocks without retrieving the data. Next slide, please. And so the central concept is a block owner. The block owner is the block ID, the change ID, the client ID, and whether or not it's activated. So activation only occurs for writes, it's ignored. For reads, it tells us whether or not when the block is on the disk, has it been basically logged. We went through several terms like logged, committed, and activated seems to not have any association with anything else. So we have a write block and a write block result, and when we have the write block, we calculate the CRC versus the offset, the sequence ID, the change ID, the client ID, the CRC as if it were 0, and the effective length in the block of data. So basically everything that goes on the wire for the block. And then when we read it back in, we calculate the same CRC and compare them. If they're different, we know that something has happened. Notice if you were paying attention on the blocks, you would see that someone else has written since the last one write occurred, but that's just an example. Go on, please. So the real big reason for all of the checks on the client ID and the change ID are we're trying to detect write holes, and write holes are data corruption. Two ways they can occur. The single client is overwriting the block, and either the client dies or the DS is partitioned or dies, or multiple clients trying to write to the same location. And I've got a good example on the writing to the same location. Can we advance? So we have the original data block with the pink and the green. Client 1 and client 2 both read it, and they both modify half of the data. So client 1 has changed the upper half to gray, client 2 is changing the lower half to orange. And what we want is gray and orange, but we're going to get either gray and green or salmon and orange. So the problem is that the original clients decided to write in the middle of a data block because the data block doesn't, or the client application doesn't align on the block boundaries. So this is where I wish I had an arm that reached a screen.
Yeah.
So what we do is we want to mediate the client overwrite. So both of them, in the red and the black, you can see they both write at the same time. Both of them evidently in the write block return, they detected that the other client had done a write at the same time. So they send layout errors to the MDS in the red and the black again. The MDS recalls the layout from client 2, which allows client 1 to proceed with rewriting the block. It writes the block and it then activates the block so that the block now becomes the one to be returned via reads. And now client 2 the whole time client 2 has been trying to get a layout because it still has IO. It finally has a layout that is successful, and it knows now it has to read the block. So it reads the block and determines that it's different from before, but it's still writing the same information. So it writes the block, and then it would activate the block after it was done. Again, so we see that we've got the same scenario before, but now they both write. We don't know which one ends up in memory, but client 1 rewrites, and client 1's mods are read by client 2 the next time, and client 2 can do its own modifications. Yeah.
So, quick question.
Uh-huh.
I'm still always skeptical. Go back a slide. I'm still always skeptical of any proposal of sequentiality of writing of 2 clients in the absence of locking, and that they will make sense.
I am too. So the one of the things that it can be wrong with this is if client 1 successfully wrote to all of the DSs and did not detect any write from client 2, and then client 2 comes in and writes over client 1, client 1 reads it back, it's the data's, you know, there's no magic here, Brian. There's no, we're not solving any problems that haven't been able to solve before. We're
Okay,
just
so
trying to
if the
detect
goal here, if the goal here is to prevent just simple block corruption in erasure coding, not to solve the consistent writing from non-locking clients, then I'm okay.
Yes, I believe I agree with what you said. That's the goal.
Okay.
Hold on, restate that again. What the goal?
The goal is to keep the blocks consistent, not to solve the problem of writing without locks.
Okay, I understand.
Okay. All right. Then that's perfect. I got it. Thanks.
So where do we go from here? I want a consensus on this approach, and Christoph can go to the mic because we've already talked about this.
Yeah, I'm not very happy with this approach. I mean, the one thing that's kind of missing in this is, yeah, audio's good. That's missing in the slide deck is a bit of the background, and Tom explained it to me. The idea is, in this case, and I don't know enough about it to judge it yet, just want to state it for others that might be trying to understand it. To have a relatively dumb MDS and basically have a more or less fixed striping scheme where the MDS is not an active participant in the stripe mapping, kind of a lot like a dumb RAID 5 or RAID 6 on a block device, sort of. I mean, independent of the actual erasure encoding algorithm. And taking that as a given, I still think the scheme feels very, very complicated and inefficient, right? If we look at the extra metadata, and when I got called to speak here, I didn't finish the math, but I think we have like 20 to 30 bytes of extra metadata per block, which
Okay.
is quite a lot, especially as this also gets updated at the activation phase. So you're creating a lot of write amplification and metadata traffic on the MDS, and you're using quite a bit of space, which is, none of this should really be required on persistent long-term storage, right? If you think of the RAID 5 or like parity override, and the write is really just a special case of the override. What matters is that you have a region that is basically in classic RAID terms the stripe set, or like the set of blocks touched by a given erasure encoding operation. And we need to stage that sort of out of place and then move it in place for reading. And in a way, I don't think we need all that persistent metadata for it, right? If we get some kind of intent, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's not quite a layout, not a lease, but it's something very similar to these NFS concepts, where you have a range in the file and you declare an intent to write to it, to update it, and that either returns a new file handle or a new state ID or some kind of identifier that you can write to. And the data server then writes it out of place, and you do a swap operation that moves it back into place for the entire range. You don't need to create all that persistent, stored forever metadata just to support these override operations. And if we define it the right way, those might actually be very useful operations, even outside of the parity rate context, because local file systems are actually starting to offer similar operations to you. Yeah, it's just my rambling. Sorry.
No. You know, a couple points that I'll bring up. One is that we usually don't introduce something so early into the working group. So you're getting a lot of the design and architecture work. You're seeing the machinery, the guts, right? How the sausage is made. The second one is the intent with the approach I gave was to do in a non-local file system way, to try and do a swap, right? And I think that's the important part, is to focus on that. Yeah.
Trond?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, you know, the intention here is above all to you know, ensure data is never corrupted. You know, given the difficulty that we have when we're writing across lots of completely independent data servers. You know, it's different to the traditional RAID problem. You know, where you can generally expect, you know, the system to be up as long as the client node is up, and you know, you don't have the same guarantees then that of connectivity and that sort of thing. So it really is in many ways a very different problem to the traditional RAID.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the traditional RAID is actually a completely broken model, and that's why we're not just replicating it, unlike, say, the very first draft here. And these are the options, and they're the trade-offs are pretty similar for distributed or not, because I mean, either you do a complete declustered RAID with a like non-fixed mapping of the parity stripes, which is what I know a bunch of the storage arrays are doing now, which has the downsides that you have a much more dynamic mapping, which would have to sit on the MDS. It has a lot of advantages for the IO pattern and the simplicity of the DS, but I understand it's not trying to go down that route, so I don't want to talk about that too much. And if you do something that has a normal linear address space that has a fixed mapping for the erasure encoding, I mean, there's basically just two things you can do that are roughly the same at the high level. And one is the write out of place and switch it back into the namespace, which is both what Tom's proposal and my counter proposal are doing, or actually write out of place too, just in form of a log. So basically, the only answer if you have a fixed a parity encoding scheme is some kind of write out of place scheme. And this one is about the I don't want to be mean, but it's about the worst one I can think of in terms of space usage and IO patterns.
No, I think what we have to do is step back and look at both approaches, and also Tron's comment should actually have been on the first slide with, here's our goal of how to, you know, what we want to do, the problem we want to solve, and go on from there.
All right, I'm going to cut it off because we're super tight and we're 3 minutes behind. So
we'll make it up right now. So this is the uncatchable attribute, and there are two basic needs for it. One is for access-based enumeration, where we want to force the access check to go to the server and not on the client. So the client is told not to cache any attributes, and every time an application asks for the attributes, we go to the server. All right. The second reason, next slide, is file data. We want to avoid the client's page cache. This is a lot like ODirect, so it's very performant. It will force the data to just go straight through. And we have, next slide. Yeah. Now we have questions.
Trond?
Yeah, I just want to point out that for the directory case, it's not just about not caching attributes, but also the directory contents, because the whole point of Windows style access-based enumeration is to only show the data that the user that is calling readir
All right, thank you.
is likely.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, 2 comments for the metadata. It's just performance is going to be a nightmare, but otherwise this looks okay. And for file data, make sure you explain exactly what the semantics are and how they relate or do not relate, in case they don't, to the commit mode. Is like the unstable writes versus sync writes versus async writes.
Okay.
Because if that's not documented, it will cause a lot of confusion.
All right. Thank you.
Rick?
All I was going to say is, when does this attribute get set? I haven't read the draft. I apologize.
You would set it yourself. The administrator or and
Okay, so you're assuming the client will throw away all cached data. What about other clients? In other words, I'm thinking if it's set when the file object is created, it's no problem. But if it's set by one client after the file is created and another client has things cached, how does it find out
all right, so
that this attribute
I was
has
actually
changed?
thinking of that when I responded to you, and my assumption was it's set on a directory and inherited by files in the directory for creation.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Thanks.
So if you want to do that, please split it into 2 attributes, because the not caching metadata on a directory versus not caching file data are very, very different semantics, and you don't want to overlay not caching directory metadata to inherit not caching file data for files.
All right. I'm going to do a show of hands for that, for the adoption. Then say no.
How many people have read this? Do we have enough people who've read this who can meaningfully address this issue about adoption?
We at least have some who've read it, and out of a group of 10 who are participating, I don't know if say 20% to 30% of the audience is sufficient. It generally is for most working groups.
You put me down as yes too. I just can't get to my.
Ted, do you want to comment on that? Is 20%? I have like 4 out of 15 have already read it.
So 2 things from me, Jahed here. 2 things from me. One thing, this is chair's call. I'll let you decide. Like, because of the participation at the size of the whole working group, you can look in the percentage of it, that one. But also, like, this you should reconfirm in the mailing list.
Oh no, absolutely.
So then basically you can get perhaps more feedback on like yeah or nay. So I mean, this is what it is. But you get what you get, and you work with that one. So it's your call. Your like the chair's call. Basically.
Thank you. Yeah, all the show of hands in the for any kind of decision need to be confirmed on the mailing list. At least this chair knows that. But thank you.
Yeah, I mean, then basically you have like the whole working group actually looking at your calls, and then you're safe.
So just for everybody, it was 7 yes, 1 no, 1 no opinion. And as our helpful AD mentioned, we will confirm that on list, but that was the show of hands results.
It was 8.
No, I was going to probably be a no opinion. So I'm counting you as me. I'm not sure. Are you on?
Yeah, hi, Chair. This is Rijesh, and I would like to present the slides.
It's great. You should have remote control of slides. If you want to tell me to advance them, I will, but you should have two big buttons on your.
Oh, okay.
I should.
Uh,
Hold on a second. I probably have to. Sorry, you have control now.
yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. So, we would like to present our idea on recursively setting the attributes on the NFS server. So I will quickly run through the background on the concern we have in the existing NFSV4 implementation, especially while setting the attributes recursively on the files and directories on a single directory. So when the client actually wants to recursively set the attributes on the files and the directories, so it basically does the read dir, and that read dir also can have multiple iterations, and each object has to be set. Attributes have to be set one by one from the client side. So we have shown this pictorially as an example. Like if there are 15 directories and the 16 files, we may have a lot of loop between client and server. Like a read dir may happen 15 times, and attribute setting can happen 31 times. And also the client needs to maintain the results of the read dir so that it can recursively set the attributes of all the files and directories are present in the particular directory. Also, it consumes a lot of bandwidth because a lot of to and forth happens on via the RPCs. So the motivation actually behind is to make the setatter faster and also reduce the bandwidth consumed due to many back and forth of the RPCs happening. And also to give back some CPU cycles back to the client by reducing the pressure on the client, so that we do have better performance in this case when we actually set the attributes in the server directly. So to actually support this, we have proposed 4 new operations opcodes on the NFSV4.2 to implement the recursive set of the attributes. So our proposal is to add a new operation called recursive set in the setatter compound, which indicates that setatter needs to be recursively set on the files and the directories and also the files inside the directories on the directory file handle, which we pass as part of the setatter operation. And this will be actually preceding compound op after setatter in the compound NFSV4 compound. And we do support synchronous and asynchronous way, which I will explain in the next slide. So in the asynchronous mode, the client can actually ping the status of the recursive set operation on the server by sending recursive set status opcode at a regular basis. And by any chance, if the client wants to cancel the recursive set operation on the server, the recursive set cancel op can be used to cancel the ongoing operation, recursive set operation on the server. And also in the asynchronous mode, the server can do a callback to the client if the recursive setatter operation is completed. So the slide explains here about the 2 modes of the operation. One is the synchronous mode, where if the number of files in the directory is inside the directory is less, then the server should be able to complete the recursive set operation within the timeout period. So the server can return the operation success back to the client. But if it has taken, if the time consumed is more or greater than some threshold, then the server can actually return a task ID for the current operation and back to the client. And client can actually do either a polling by doing a recursive set status, or wait for the or also as an optional way, wait for the CB status from the server for knowing the operation is complete. So also if the client determines that okay, this needs to be done in the asynchronous manner, we have a flag in the recursive set operation that the server can do this in the asynchronous manner. So the server can immediately return the task ID back to the client, and client can either wait for the CB recursive set notification from the server, or also optionally do the recursive set status from to know the existing status of the ongoing recursive operation. So if the recursive operation is still ongoing, we may return an error code, NFS4 error pending, back to the client, so that the client will do the next retry of the recursive set status, and it keeps polling at regular intervals. So yeah, that is mostly what we want to cover. And also we have so the operations just explained here, like what are the opcode and the arguments and the return status for it. So the recursive set has only one object, synchronous, whether asynchronous or asynchronous mode. So the set attr does actually the core operation in the compound op. And the recursive set status will poll with the task ID whichever is returned from the server. So the return, if the status if it is not complete, then the server will return NFS error pending. And also the cancel with the task ID, and the server can return the status of the cancel task. And this is the callback from the server when the recursive set attributes is complete. So also in the draft, we have covered the grace part and the server reboot and the client reboot part. So yeah, so thanks. This is our proposal. So I would like to, if there is any questions, I would like to take. Me and Bargo can take the questions. Thanks.
Tom Haynes. So the first question is, what happens when you encounter permissions that don't allow you to do the operation down in the tree?
So our current proposal is, if there is an error which is happening in between, so the client can actually, if the access denied has happened, client can actually poll the server again for what operations have completed by doing a reader again and getting the status of the existing files and directories.
So that's not in the draft.
That is not mentioned very detailed, but yeah, if not, maybe we can add it at more detailed way.
And then the second question, and I'm done, is what happens if you cross file systems?
Bargo, would you like to answer that question?
If we cross the file system, we haven't actually thought about that scenario.
Then it's okay. I mean, we raised the question. That's good enough.
Yeah.
Trond?
So my question is, how do you expect server implementers to have this build this so that it scales to sort of the typical sort of file system size that you have these days, where you can have billions of files and easily hundreds of millions of directories?
Basically, yeah, so the server need to maintain the states internally, and then do an iterative way of setting the attributes. Maybe it can also do some parallel processing on that. and accomplish the task. But it should be better than the client sending the RPCs over the wire. So definitely, when we are offloading to the server, if the server can able to maintain the states and then do the recursive setting, it should be give us a better performance in this case.
Yeah, I just heard Tron. Hi, Brian Plowski. The ramifications of someone doing the wrong directory for changing stuff could be huge. Whereas, when you're sitting on a client and it's doing itself, doing all the work itself, you will notice that your client just went away. Whereas this could take a server away and impact other clients. Interesting question that Tron raised. No answer over here, though.
Bargo, would you like to add something on this?
So, Brian, is it any different from a client actually doing a change mode on recursively on its own?
Yeah, the client will throttle itself going over the wire and have less likelihood of making a server crash to its knees, whereas sending an operation over to a server might actually bring the server to its knees and affect multiple clients. I think it's just something we should consider and talk about. And maybe this is handled by, I'm sorry, but you just exceeded your runtime. I don't have time for this anymore, and you cancel it on the server side. It might be policy based. You don't want an out of control server.
Got that.
Running. Yeah. We'll pursue afterwards.
So, Christoph Herwig, I've got comments and questions, actually quite a whole bunch. So the first thing is, I really try to understand the use case a little better. Is like, what attributes do you have in mind that you're setting recursively? What's your client architecture? Because I can't really see how that would be done in a normal like Unix or Windows VFS. Also, kind of what are your assumptions for the server that could actually do this? So do you have like a little sketch of the use case?
Yeah. So actually, in our practical scenario, what we have seen is we may need to basically change the owner of all the files and directories underneath. So that is one use case what we have seen. Maybe yeah. So there could be such other use cases also where we may have to set the attributes recursively on the files and directories. Especially when we are working with the remote build servers, we do see that we have some requirements here where you have multiple files.
And I mean, the other interesting thing, I mean, one is what BP or Brian already said is like, you probably need a server side limit of how many outstanding operations you can have in like one sequence to not like create a lot of state on the server. And I'm really worried about a failure mode where it just fails halfway through. So maybe that just needs to be documented, but even then, it does not make me feel very good about this operation. And the other thing I wanted to bring in is like, when we're talking about recursive operation, we have a lot of different objects in an NFS, types of objects in a file system, right? We got directories, obviously, regular files, device special files, symbolic links, and most attributes don't apply to all of them equally. So it will be there will only be a very limited set where you can actually do a full recursive implementation. And especially for symbolic links, the next question is, does it stop at the symbolic link? Because the link resolution is usually like a client-side VFS feature or not, but that really needs to be clearly documented.
So you're not thinking to traverse the symbolic links, Christopher, because then it can go into a larger set of directories, which might not be envisioned by the client operation.
And that's fine. We just need to really clearly document what recursive means.
Sure. Sure.
And similar, what happens if you're trying to apply attributes to objects where they don't work or work differently? For example, the ACLs tend to work quite differently on directories versus non-directory entries and so on.
So we will document that semantics that whatever the normal the setting of the set at if it fails on a given object, the same semantics should apply here.
Well, the time bomb.
Rick, go ahead and hopefully you can keep it short.
Yes, I was going to say the problem I see with this as a client implementer is you would have to blow away all the client caches for attributes and whatnot, and all that chattiness you're trying to get rid of really often is what loads the attribute cache in the client. It seems, as a client implementer to do this, I would have to throw away the attribute cache for all file objects, probably in the entire amount, because I don't know where that subtree is. I don't know that there's a good solution for that. It's just a compromise.
And then you'd have to refresh because you don't know exactly what the server action resulted in from the client perspective until you refetch them.
That's right. So afterwards, I'm guessing that the client would do a large number of get attrs to find out what the information is.
So wouldn't that in that case, so just a question. So wouldn't that in that case, even if you do a read plus, the amount of read plus calls would be a lot lesser than the set attr, which will ultimately fill up the client attribute cache.
All right, I'm actually gonna. I wish I could have let this go on. We will absolutely run out of time. Go do your one sentence.
I think the assumption of the client is doing a read dir plus is maybe not universal, because a lot of these might be in the directory cache of whatever, and it will actually be get attrs. So
I would love, as a chair, to see this kind of conversation continue on the list, possibly come to an interim. I'm sorry I didn't have more time to give you guys.
Sure, no issues. Thank you. Thanks for the time. Thank you.
Yeah, talk about it here. Sorry. Rick, you're up. I think you should have control.
It looks like I do. Okay, so this proposal came out of David Novik's work on trying to resolve the problems with ACLs, and I really think it's an unsolvable problem, to be honest. But anyway, one of the issues I tackled was the fact that many servers, like the Linux ones, typically store a POSIX draft ACL on the file object and use that for access permissions. I use the true form for this. It came from IBM's GPFS. So essentially, the problem you run into frequently is you would do a set of a NFSV4 ACL, and then you do get of the same for the same file object, and what would come back would look different than what you set, and that's just a pretty fundamentally confusing thing. So I propose that for the case where servers store POSIX draft ACLs as their true form, there would be new attributes added to NFS version 4.2 to directly access and manipulate those. And that's really what this little proposal is all about. The mapping that is used between POSIX draft ACLs and NFSV4 ACLs is never exact, and because of that, it can cause a lot of confusion. I'll go through the rest really quickly. It's not much to them. Essentially, the true form at the moment can be either an NFSV4 ACL, a POSIX draft ACL, or no ACL at all. And that attribute is simply read-only and allows the client to find out which kind of ACL is actually being stored on the object. So it has a better way to decide what attributes to use. Oh no, maybe I'm here. Okay, so the next question becomes, does that true form apply across the entire server, the entire a file system on a server, or the file object individually. I admit the third case I didn't anticipate when I first wrote the draft, but David Novak indicated that it would be an interesting option, and IBM's GPFS turns out it actually does it, or at least optionally. So these both are very straightforward read-only attributes that the client can use to determine what it wants to do when it comes to setting and getting ACLs. Now the POSIX draft ACL is a little different in format than the NFSV4 one, but not. Essentially, it's a list of aces. Each ace has a tag. I didn't list them all here because it didn't fit on the screen. Simple permissions, read, write, or execute. It's coarser granular than the NFSV4 ACLs. And then there's in the POSIX draft ACL, there's a GID or a UID. And I replaced that with a who string, which would translate to those user and groups. So most of it works just fine, but I recently ran into questions. I don't know if I'd call it a problem with respect to verify and n-verify. Essentially what happens is, unlike NFSV4 ACLs, a POSIX ACL, the semantics for it, the access permissions, isn't based on the order of the aces. It's based entirely on the tags. As such, if you take two POSIX draft ACLs and you reorder the aces, you still get the same semantics. But the question then becomes, is it the same ACL for verify and verify? This seems to be the big open question at the moment. There's also a problem with the who strings because it's really the underlying user ID and GID that are represented by the who strings that determines access, and not the strings themselves. So if two different strings happen to map to the same user ID, for example, the digits 1001 versus the string rmacklem at uoguelph.ca, then they really are the same ace, although they don't look like the same on the wire. So that's the main outstanding issue. Just this morning, there was a couple of emails from Trond and Chuck, and it sounds like they want the draft to specify how you would compare to NFS or two POSIX draft ACLs. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So my current thinking, and I'd look for input on this, both on the mailing list in here, is whether it would be a must, a should, or a may. And it might say that the ACLs are the same so long as they have the same set of aces, but in different orders. And that should be the case, or may be the case. And that's up to the server for verify and verify. It's worth noting that verify and verify don't normally happen for ACLs and may never happen. One person brought up something about having two different modes, one for NFSV4 and one for POSIX, and I didn't understand that, so I really can't comment any further, and I don't know if they're here today. I currently have prototype implementations running in both FreeBSD and Linux, and with the exception of questions related to verify and verify, which aren't actually done in the implementations, everything else seems to be working reasonably well. So I guess we open it up for questions.
Okay, Christoph Helwig here. First, really thanks for the work. It's great, and I really owe you a review on the Linux stuff, but I'm just too busy. That's just the first thing. Next thing, I'll chime in to verify. As far as I know, verify is just deadwood in the spec, and I don't know if there's anything that prevents us from saying you just can't do verify and verify on these new attributes, which I think would solve all of that.
Yes, in the FreeBSD client, verify is only used for type and size, and the size is one is a bit sketchy because it's not atomic anyway.
Yeah.
In other words, it applies to basically I do an append write by comparing the offset with the size, and then if with verify, and then doing the write, but it's not guaranteed to work correctly. It just reduces the window of failure.
But especially for complex attributes like all the echo stuff, I don't really see how it could be used in a not completely racy and dangerous way.
Yes, well, I actually put on the email list just yesterday a suggestion that maybe Chuck should introduce a new attribute like supported attributes for verify attributes. And then the server could simply say, I only do verify on these ones. But he hasn't responded yet, or no one else
like
has.
the idea. I'm not sure it's backwards compatible, but I'd be all in favor of just saying all the new ones where we don't have a use case for it, just don't support it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll try to actually get back to mailing list traffic. I'm way behind. I'll see if I can chime in there. And a few other things. So one thing that came to my mind today when I wrote through it, which is kind of totally non-technical, is POSIX is a trademark by IEEE. Can we use the name for doing something based on a retracted draft they did more than 20 years ago? I don't know. Maybe we should ask them. It's actually the best name we have. I wish we could use it, but we should probably check this out.
Brian, make a note that's a chair thing to resolve.
The other thing is, I noticed you referenced Andreas. Sorry. You referenced Andreas Grunbacher's presentation on things like the mode bit setting. I think by IETF standards, that's not a normative reference. I think we need to copy the algorithm over and put it in here. And I think it's actually changed a bit too since his presentation. But we can talk to him. He's a nice guy. I'm pretty sure he will contribute whatever IP he has on there for the draft.
Yes, I suppose that's quite a debatable point. It isn't well documented. I think it was the other David, who I can't remember a lot. David used to be
Black.
at EMC.
David Black.
Black, yes. He
He's still
stated
there.
that he thought that the Usenix paper was sufficient, but others, I believe David Novak, wasn't so sure. So we may have to describe the ACLs in this document, because yes, the withdrawn draft is out there, but it's not really meaningful in any way.
Yes, I think we need to pull more in. And once I have a little more time, I'm happy to help with. And until then, I'm at least happy to introduce you to Andreas if he has anything to dump on you, and we'll see how we can get this done. And now comes to the only part I find scary, which is the true form scope attribute. So the one thing that isn't scary, but which I think is a little useless or not good, is the system scope, because I don't think there's any benefit for the client to see a system versus file system scope, because it has to basically, I don't know, it saves us one get adder on the root while making the spec more complicated. But I'm not really worried. This is just a note. What actually really worries me is the per file or per object, I try to remember what it's called, scope, because that actively feels dangerous to me, because the mode bit calculation is tied to the true scope. And if that can actually change dynamically, I can see a lot of things go very wrong.
Well, I admit I was surprised by it too, but it turns out that IBM's GPFS does allow it. IBM's GPFS does all three variants. It does NFSV4 ACLs or POSIX draft ACLs, or it allows both in the same file system. Maybe David Novak, who's here, can comment a little more, because he seemed to think that was an interesting option that I put in the draft as best I could, but I don't have any hands-on experience with it.
The real question is, do we need to support it just because someone does it out there? Because even if someone does it, I think it's actually a very bad idea. which is a thing with GPFS in general.
I don't know how it works here. David, can you comment on that?
On what specifically?
On the file object scope.
Sure. I think we have support for NFSV4 ACLs. Not complete support, but we have substantial support, and I think we would want to have support for also have support for people who wanted the draft POSIX ACLs, and we would want to do that on the basis of per file basis, because we'll find some customers will want that, and other customers will want what they have, and so therefore I don't see any way about the approach to do anything other than the approach that you've taken in the draft we're discussing. I think that is okay. As far as your problem with verify, I have to deal with that issue, not for ACLs, but for the user and group. And I think my position is that it should be explicit. It should be made explicit that whether you support verifier and verifier for an attribute is up to the definition of the attribute. And I think you could say that about your ACLs, whether you support ACL, support verify, or I could say it. I'd be inclined to say it about the user and group attributes. In any case, I don't agree that it should be up to every server, but it's certainly, if you define a new attribute, you should be able to say, I support read, I support write, or whether I support verify. And that will be in the next draft of RFC 5661 bis. Anyway, that's my position on that. I think that's it for that.
Brian?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, no,
Rick, I have a very quick comment. Rick, you at the beginning you said the one true thing that is inarguable. This problem is essentially unsolvable, and NFS will do what it's always done, which is a best effort to become useful to people who want to deploy this.
Tron?
Yeah, just another comment on the verify and verify thing. The mask sort of also complicates matters because it basically causes you to have an effective ACL versus a a stored ACL. So when sort of trying to define that kind of sameness, we probably want to have a discussion around the mask as well.
Dave, you're in queue still? Dave, do you have comment on the previous presentation? You're still in queue.
Yeah, well. All right, this is my I don't have this. Well, I have like 17 minutes. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but we'll go through basically I'll go through about 5 or 10 minutes worth, and then I'll be responsive to questions. All right. So okay, so next slide. Okay. All right. Now these 3 slides are why we did this. We reached the point for v4.1. Got to the point where we needed a BIS document. We started with the idea that we need BIS documents for 5661 and 5662, and we had built up over the years, like 14 years, tons of errata reports to address. In addition to those, we had 2 areas that were totally wrong in the existing documents. One is internationalization, which was, for those who read it, it's pretty clear nobody's implemented it, or most people have just not read it and just ignored it. But anyway, that is in an area that has never been correctly described for NFSV 4.1. And the other one is security, which was never correctly. The working group decided that those would be split out, and so as a result of splitting out both internationalization and security, we would wind up with a bigger set of documents because we wound up that needing to split our ACLs as well. So we wound up with 5 documents, which I'll describe later. So anyway, drafting of that has gone on for years, but it's quite far along, and I'd like to push this to get over the hump with this and get this done. Although this document, RFC 56, came out in early 2010, I think. So it's near 15 years. It's about time to get it done. So anyway, that's where we are. Okay. Anyway, the drafting is pretty much done, but for various reasons, the working group discussion of the document has lagged. Now we have tiny documents, and it seems like we've spent hours. I think we need to just look at the documents. People need to read them and see if there are any issues. Or I think that's gone farther with internationalization, although most people aren't that concerned with internationalization. But we know that what's in the RFC 5661 and RFC 8881 is just wrong, never been implemented, and need to get beyond that. All right. Okay. Okay. The way this thing is displayed is wrong, but anyway, we have five documents. ACLs, we had adoption requested a while ago, and I don't know where that is, but I think that we should proceed along with the adoption of that. I don't see any reason not to do that. Internationalization, Chris has told us that he's looking for people to say, yes, let's go ahead with that. And I think we should be going ahead. Security, that adoption was requested 2 years ago, and I don't know why it's taken 2 years to that. And also, let's see, the RFC 5662 BIS, that also needs to be adopted. So we are fairly far along on those, and we need to proceed farther on the adoption, and I'll probably discuss that. I'll have some time to discuss that more in the interim meeting, but I think we're done now. Any questions on those documents from anybody?
People are joining queue in a second.
So, I mean, bluntly speaking, the reason why they aren't adopted is because there is no working group consensus to adopt them. And that might be because of the form of the document, right? If you look at the security document, it's a lot of rambling. And on page 24, it starts with an introduction to NFS4 security. Maybe that's not the kind of document larger parts of the working group think of as leading forward. Similar for 5661 BIS, it's like if we don't start out with importing the existing last document into source control and can actually look at the changes, I don't know how anyone in the working group can actually tell how the errata are incorporated, how this is actually a provable improvement over the previous document. It's like, I don't know how we're supposed to work with them. And sorry if this sounds a little pissed off, but I'm pretty sure I've said that a few times before in nicer ways.
Jahed. So I think So I'm getting a kind of mixed feelings here. Like I think the working group wanted to work with security documents because this was requested by somewhere in the ISG, and we promised to deliver that one. So, and then I also see like people are really not really sure like how to use this security document. That's the thing. And also I see the way security documents are written is quite big and doing a lot of things. That might be actually another reason that people don't want to look at it, and it cannot come to a conclusion like whether this is something to go forward with. And that has been there for a long time, and David is working it on this one alone, almost alone, and we should give credit to him for doing that. Um, but now I'm coming to that point. But if the working group don't think like this is something that they don't they don't need it, they don't want to do it, so we can we just need to drop them. I mean, we cannot just hang on them for another 2 years to do nothing. And if you explain it really well, the working group explain why this is not doable. I think as you said, like I think Christoph made a good point. Like if 5661 bis, if I cannot try this out and see like how things are going and if it is improving or not improving or fixing or actually creating more things, issues, and that need to be like well into the come to the working group document to actually work on. So the two questions is still for non-adapted documents, I think we should try to do this, like check whether we have interest in it to actually do anything about it. If not, drop it. I mean, don't waste uh, energy and time on it. But that might feel really bad for Dave because he has been working on this security thing, and we have lots of open issues. So the working group also have to tell me how they plan to address all this erratas. If they don't want to work on these documents, then you need to also tell me how to solve these errata things and what to do with them. Because I think somewhere, if you look into the errata, look into the working group, the documents there, something is broken. But practically, everything is working fine. So I am in a dilemma, like what's going on, and I want this working group to come to a conclusion. Tell me like what they really want to do, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Um, I mean, we have been doing this splitting of document and all this thing all along for quite a long time. It's on there for the last 4 years on me when I took on. So please, I think chairs, you need to take an action point on these things and try to decide, because I see Dave's point here, like coming every time here, talking about we should progress or we should drop, and then explain why we're dropping it.
Thanks. Rick?
Yes, I was going to say if it wasn't too much work, maybe it would be possible to take part of the security document and make it an informational, like an informational RFC describing the state of NFS security or insecurity, if you prefer. And then the parts that suggest using new features like NFS over TLS could be a smaller document separate from that. But I don't know. I don't want David to do an awful lot of work rewriting these things, but maybe if they could be quickly separated out, it might make it easier for the readers.
Thanks.
I don't know if David has any opinion on that.
Well, it's going to be different than yours. Let me be clear. I think that if you look at what is said about security in the existing documents, it's unreasonable. It says to use AuthSys, and there's no problem with it. It says it's an optional means of authentication. It's not optional. Optional in our means that it's okay to choose that. It's not okay to choose it. It has some negative security consequences, and they need to be pointed out. We can't disallow it, but we have to be clear that by using that, you're exposing yourself to to rogue clients. And that was the basis. I wrote this. I think we have RPC with TLS that gives us. So I think people should consider, if they don't like this or don't think it's needed, think about what we say in RFC 7530 and what's in RFC 8881 about security. And it's not acceptable. It's not an acceptable result. And yes, people live with it, they deal with it. But as far as a secure protocol, it isn't. So that's where we are. It's up to the working group whether how they want to deal with this. I've done what I could do. I will make changes, but I think basically I still feel fundamentally we have to deal with the fact that we never really took security seriously. And in this time around, we do have to do it.
So responding to Zahed, obviously what we're doing is not getting us finished. So that is a crisp critique. The background here was a long time ago. We got a lot of feedback from outside the working group that we should break this thing up into pieces and kind of make it easier to consume. And I think all those people that asked for it are no longer in the IETF. And the working group is now stuck with with a fragmented document that is difficult to compare to the original. It's self-inflicted because we were trying to solve a problem for the powers that be, let's call them that. And now it's basically just causing us a lot of problems here that we can't just do simple comparisons. We need to figure out a way to just get that, Christoph. I get you. But I don't have an answer for how to simplify the diff aspect of it. Dave has taken the time to try to flag pieces in kind of appendices, for reviewer guidance and stuff, but it's a lot of stuff, I guess. Anyway, interim meeting discussion, thinking beforehand. Maybe Zahed, we need to talk.
So, I mean, little factual correction, right? I mean, 5661 requires implementing secure end-to-end authentication. It doesn't require using it, which honestly isn't actually followed by all implementations, but if it was a reasonable documentation of the state of the art, which of course has moved a lot, especially with TLS, but I don't think that's the biggest red flag. But I mean, back to the point to BP, I'm not even just worried about splitting out the security and internationalization documents. I don't think it helps. I don't think it's the major problem. The problem is management of the big BIS document, right? I've worked a lot with Tom when he did 4.2, and when you have a document in version control, you can see changes, you see what's changed. It's even more helpful if you have an original document. If you get a new dump every month where everything changes and sections move around, it's just impossible to review. On the other hand, if you follow normal source control practice where you change one thing at a time, actually write a commit log why it's changed. It's like fixes errata XYZ, fixes IESG feedback 4. Everyone understands what's going on, might not agree with a change, but understands it and can work based on that. While just drops of giant documents don't work.
All right, so Chris, as a contributor, not as a chair here, I will say I have tried for the past 10 months. I've Kerberized my house, which, by the way, is not exactly fun, but it's actually easier than getting NFS to use Kerberos. And so if you try to deploy any kind of security of NFS in a brownfield, not in a greenfield environment where you start from scratch, it's like nigh impossible. right? So to be clear, and this is on the list, I have a wide mix of different operating systems in my house that I'm trying to do this with: Windows, Mac OS, FreeBSD, and Linux of different flavors. And so some part for me for security document is I don't know what practical guidance with what exists now for the definition of security is doable. And I would say the constraints of that we bring forward some of the stuff from the file system the whole way up forward, it absolutely complicates matters. This is a complicated problem. I acknowledge this is a complicated problem. I'm aware this is a complicated problem. I think really getting our arms around security in particular, I can't really comment on 5661 BIS per se, but those are going to be really hard to do, is the short version. Zahed, I agree with you. We're not making the progress we need to do, but this is actually going to be a hairball to fix.
So, Jahed here again. So two things. I think Brian BP, you said like, okay, those people wanted it, that's gone, and all this. So we're in a vacuum. So like what do we want to do, what we have, and what's going to be. But that's fine. I mean, we are in present. If we don't have reviewer, we don't know what to do. We just like retire. I mean, retire the work, not like from your work, but retire the document and call it explain it to the people, like, or to ISG, like, well, we have or perhaps really the simplest way, like, okay, what is the best practice we have, how we run NFSV4 protocols in a insecure environment, and also claim like there is no security problem. So let's describe that on have an information or best practice thing and done with it. If that is the case, you do that. You don't need to really do these kind of things. And for the beast part, I don't know like what to do with there. I mean, it's too hard to solve. We don't care. Then also, this is a good reason to drop it. So the problem I see, what I'm asking from the working group is like, if we don't see the need now, if we don't see the resource to do it, there is no reason to just hang it on there because we're spending time on it, like today. I mean, so I just want this working group to decide, or basically, then otherwise, like somewhere, the ISG has to decide what to do with this. I don't know. So I want this working group to come up with a proposal in like next cycle, interim or whatnot you call it. Come up with a proposal like that's like doable, manageable with the workforce we have.
We're going to lose our
Yeah,
we're going to lose our beat echo in a moment.
Exactly. But anyway, thanks for this meeting. I think we have more things to do in the interims.
Yep. Look forward to seeing people on the interims. I don't even have time to kind of bring up but it's already scheduled. Look at the calendar; it's out on the list, and there should be more on deck. And Soren, I did see your comment in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Ha ha ha.
Thanks, everybody. You're right.
Just decide on having the documents would be good. Yeah, I know that.